Elliot Francis is graduate of the Multidisciplinary Design Program at the University of Utah and co-founder of Optimizing Autism. Having worked as a successful systems analyst and IT project manager during college and after graduation, Elliot has a breadth of expertise in cross-domain systems and solutions. His major projects include the development and deployment of 2 mission-critical internal software systems for the University of Utah Health Science Cores, each covering 15 research labs, acting as one of the representing autists on the Optimizing Autism board. And I love that he uses the term autist. It's almost like artist to describe adults on the spectrum. But as a representing autist on the Optimizing Autism board, Elliot provides a specialist perspective on how autism can be leveraged in the modern detail-oriented work environment. Elliot and his wife of 5 years live and work in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we are really thrilled to have him as our keynote today. Let's have a big round of applause for Elliot.
We good? Everybody can hear me, right? You have no idea how happy I am that none of you have heard me talk before, because that means none of you hate me yet. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little tiny introduction, and then we'll segue into what I'm actually going to be talking about. Normally, when I get up to present at events, one of the most popular topics of the many that I have is the one about my dating experience and how I built a user manual for my wife. Given the level of interest this story usually generates, I'm going to base my comments on that story and dig a little bit deeper into the concepts and methods that underlie why I went about it the way that I did, and how these concepts are useful for developing and cultivating interpersonal relationships in general, not just specifically in dating. Of course, the first thing I need to do is acknowledge some contextual information and experiential bias. I am a cisgender, heterosexual, Christian male of Northern European descent who works in software development. And if there's an easier setting for life right now, I don't know what it is. My family also had the resources during my upbringing to pay for access to private schooling, extended periods of talk therapy, and the ability to indulge the slight neuroticism that being a parent involves when talking and taking care of one's own children. This means that for all intents and purposes, I got to go through life with none of the barriers that someone not of the dominant sociocultural makeup of the United States encounters by virtue of having restricted access to medical, educational, or emotional supports. For the purposes of this presentation, that means 2 things. First, my life and experiences are not a representative sample of anything. Second is that I have biases, acknowledged and unacknowledged, that are baked into what I say, and if anyone listening disagrees with me on a point of context or conclusion, I'm happy to go to the mat about that after we're done. I will also warn you in advance that as of last night, my wife has informed me that I am in love with the sound of my own voice, so feel free to tune me out at any point. The introduction out of the way, I will now tell you the story that everybody seems to love so much. Starting in high school, I was having difficulty, as many people do during that time of life, but most especially autists have, with struggling to understand the nature of interpersonal relationships and dating, that hormone-fueled and completely irrational exercise whereby you try to pair up with someone else for, I would assume, is mutual good conversation, but I'm sure there are other motivating factors. It took me about 10 years to get that sort of solved, at least for myself. But the process that I went through involved a whole lot of analysis of the various ways that people go about creating relationships in a modern environment with a specific focus on romantic ones. The biggest thing that I identified as part of that process is that absolutely nobody had any idea what was going on. They were all making it up as they were going along and just throwing noodles at the wall to see what would stick. This, of course, is a completely inefficient way to go about forming relationships. And I said to myself, nope, I refuse. I reject that reality. It's not something I want to participate in. So I did what any good modern millennial does when they don't like the way the world works. I went to the internet. I signed up on a number of dating sites to try and understand exactly how they were doing it in a more technical manner, and settled finally, and I say finally, this took about 7 years, and there were at least 7 different dating sites involved. So finally, I settled on using OkCupid. And the reason that I settled on using that website is because they have this fun little feature where user-submitted questions get fed to you, you answer them, and supposedly it builds you a personality profile to match your compatibility with other people. Now, from a scientific perspective, I looked at this and said, wow, that's great. It takes all the hard work out of everything. They're just going to match me with people that I'm supposed to be good with, right? Yeah, no, it doesn't work like that. So after doing this for about 3 years and having very little success, what I ended up doing is I said, look, this obviously doesn't work, but I like the idea. The idea that somehow you can codify who you are as a person and then match it up against people is really good. That's something that's very useful when you're trying to make friends, when you're trying to form romantic relationships, and quite generally when you're doing anything that involves another person. A little bit of the sort of know thyself in there. So what I did is I said, they still don't know what they're doing. They have a great idea, but they're just using it all wrong. So in an effort, and admittedly a little bit of exasperation with regards to the level of outcomes that I was achieving, I decided that I was going to borrow a poker term, lay all my cards on the table. I was going to sit down, and I was going to leverage what at that point I think was about 10 years of talk therapy and a whole lot of interest in psychology and personality understanding to develop an explanation of who I was as a person and why I was the way I was. You could see how that might be useful. And that ended up turning into an 18-page manual that I called my user manual. That was a complete explanation of everything. It covered why I slept from 9 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, why I like to eat peanut butter but absolutely hate vegetables, why I managed my money the way that I did, what preferences I had, why I like Star Trek, why I didn't like fluorescent lights, and all this other fun stuff. Put it all together in this big giant document, and I said, okay, this time, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go out, I'm going to find people to connect with, and I'm going to hand them this. Not the first time, never the first time. So the first time really scares people off. But the second time I met someone, I would give them this manual and say, here, this is information about who I am and why I work the way I do. My response was pretty uniformly positive because all of a sudden it didn't take, and this is especially true for dates, because it didn't take 6 months for someone to figure out that they didn't like the way I put the cap back on the toothpaste. Useful. I would always couch it in terms of saying, okay, look, I'm trying to form a relationship here. This is something that's important to me. I'm tired of wasting my time. I'm tired of wasting your time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to take that horrible process that you encounter in high school and college and just in life in general, where you go around lying about yourself, hoping that somebody will like you enough by the end of whatever that lie is to accept what you actually are. And kneecapped it, beat it over the head with a 2x4, and dumped it in the dumpster out back. This did 2 things for me. One, it got me married very quickly. And 2, it started giving me the confidence to be able to look at the people around me and stand with some degree of surety that I actually already knew who I was, and you could either take it or leave it. Those 2 things have done absolute wonders for my ability to communicate with the people around me. Because now I know exactly who I am. I sat down and I wrote 18 pages of documentation that explained who I was. This was useful for other people, but it was mostly useful for myself because now I didn't have to sit down and really try and remember, do I like chocolate today? The other thing that it did is it made me a little bit more of a jerk and a little less tolerant of people who were unwilling to accept that perhaps I was different from them. The power that gives you, especially when you're interacting with neurotypical individuals who are very insecure and very neurotic, is fantastic. Because now all of a sudden you can walk into a conversation absolutely sure of who you are, and they're right, confidence is sexy. So now you can walk into that conversation and say, hi, I am who I am. You can either take it or leave it. And you know what? If you don't like it, I don't need to know you. Yeah, mostly that works. Doesn't work with my boss too well. But the value and the methodology of being able to sit down and take a look at my life. Now, I haven't actually updated that document since I used it the first couple of times. I haven't actually looked at it in a couple of years. But the process that I went through of identifying which pieces were critical to who I was as a person and the utility of being able to analyze my own behavior was absolutely fantastic. It helps me focus. It helps me leverage the special skills that I've got as a systems analyst that I inherited from my autism. We're all detail-oriented and focused on making sure that everything fits together properly, that all the gears mesh and it's running smoothly, right? Well, I took that and I was able to turn it around and make it so that my emotional life was as stable as the physics that runs the universe, mostly. The end result is, of course, that I am now responsible for mission-critical software at the University of Utah. We do $5 million in billing annually. The efficiency gains that we've seen used to take 2 weeks to do billing for the department. We now do it in 4 hours. It's directly attributable to software that I've written. I've also been able to advocate for my own needs in the working environment. I can now walk up to my boss and say, hey, I really hate those lights. All I want to do is just unscrew them. And they'll say yes. Partially because I'm really valuable, but also because I'm willing to go into them with a solution to the problem, not just a problem. So the methods that are going to be most important, I'm hoping that some of you might be interested in applying this in your own life. Otherwise, there is absolutely no reason for me to be up here talking. The methods that you're going to want to be aware of for figuring that out and how you're going to want to use those for reaching out to the people around you. And this not only applies to autists, but this applies to neurotypical individuals as well, are first and foremost an awareness of yourself. And I know that sounds stupid and cheesy. I used to hear people come into, my high school class, and they'd tell you, you got to know yourself, right? Well, knowing yourself is a little bit less of a discovery process and more of a decision-making process. You have to sit down and you have to determine what's most important to you and then decide that other people can either take it or leave it. The other thing that you need to be able to do, or you need to learn how to do, and these are all learnable skills, is how to look at someone else and understand that they need that information to make accurate decisions and how to convey that properly. So, the main question that you get, or at least that I get when I talk about this stuff, is first, how do I use that to be less scared of talking about who I am as an autist? Because it's scary. We're different, all of us. The changes in the way that or the differences in the way that our neurology works makes us especially susceptible to things that are completely invisible to those around us. And I think I just lost my own train of thought. As I've said before, I tend to get in love with the sound of my own voice and then just wander off into the weeds a bit. So, okay, there we go. Abstracting for general relationships. Start at the beginning by acknowledging that the person that you're talking to, as a general rule, does not understand that your worldview is different from theirs. This is true for autists and neurotypicals. We both make the same mistake, although for slightly different reasons. So when you are coming into a conversation or trying to form a relationship with someone, you come in with the understanding that the person that you're talking to knows nothing about you. And when you start revealing information to them, what you're fundamentally doing is you're giving them opportunities to make decisions about whether or not they want to continue interacting with you. So stuff that's easy, like your name, where you live, sometimes what music you like. I know there are some of you who like Dave Matthews Band. I'm sorry, it's your problem, not mine. These are easy things because you can hand them to people conceptually, and then they can say, oh, I've got connecting points to talk to this person. I can talk about how much I like Dave Matthews or how much I hate Dave Matthews or anything else in between. But when you start getting into things like autism and your communication style, I don't know how many of you have read the Love Languages book. If you haven't, you probably should. It's a good thinker. But it talks about how you interact with people. And when you start giving people this information, it does one of two things. Either you synchronize with them and say, oh yeah, I'm also an autist, or I have ADHD, or I have some other neurodiverse condition that helps me connect with you and understand what your context is. Or they say, I'm neurotypical. They don't actually say that, of course, but they, the thought process that goes through their head is, I don't know what this is. Why are you giving this to me? What am I supposed to do with this? You're handing me a problem. Great, now I've got another problem that I need to solve because little Jimmy just threw up in the car on the way in this morning, and now I got to deal with your problem and that problem at the same time, and you've just made my day more complicated. Well, if we come into it with that understanding, if we come into it so that we're saying, I don't know anything about you, I don't understand you, but I want to learn. These are the safe pieces of information that I can give you. And if I'm going to give you a bomb that you need to defuse, I'm going to give you the tools to defuse it too. This does wonders for the forming of relationships because all of a sudden you're starting off with communication skills so that you're not threatening the other person as you're interacting. Next is the ability to Basically come at it with an open mind. We're going to go back to my dating life for a little while, and now to my married life in conjunction with that. My wife is also neurodiverse. She has ADHD. I got actually really lucky. The person that I married, her sister is on the autism spectrum, so she came already trained. I didn't have to do anything. But the beginning of that process was, and the continuation of that process was and is, a continuing exercise in open communication and positive decision making. Meaning that when we come into a concept or a conversation, we say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and now we're going to participate in the process of getting there. This includes being willing and able to leave your own assumptions at the door, which is actually something that autists are really good at. How many of you come into a situation that you know absolutely nothing about and are aware that you know absolutely nothing about it? Come on, I want hands. Yeah. This is a fantastic skill. This is a fantastic skill that autists come by naturally that gives us an advantage in relationships that neurotypical people do not have. They come in blind to their underlying assumptions. They don't know what they don't know. And they don't know that they don't know what they don't know. And when you tell them that they don't know what they don't know, they get kind of angry at you and assume that you're attacking them. Haven't figured that one out yet. Autists, on the other hand, when we come into a situation, we know nothing about it, we know nothing about it, and we start trying to learn and pattern. This is a tremendous advantage for relationship building. Unfortunately, it's only a tremendous advantage for relationship building when we go about it in a way that doesn't threaten the people that we're interacting with. I don't like people at all. They're angry, they're confused, sometimes they're stupid, mostly they're just ignorant. Autists are a little better. We tend to know we're ignorant and accept that as part and parcel for the course. Neurotypicals, they don't know they're ignorant and never really know what to do with them. But we have an opportunity as autists to come into a situation honestly, focused, with the knowledge that we can build a system and we can learn the skills to interact with anybody and to interact with anybody in ways that are valuable in the world today. A lot of people like to talk about autists and how their special skills are useful in the workplace. Apparently, we're really great software testers, something about repeatedly pressing buttons. But they very rarely acknowledge that the relationships that they seek to have, that open, honest communication that comes naturally between longtime friends, longtime still married couples, and anybody who's got a reasonable modicum of sense in their head, where you can sit down and you can talk about anything. There are no assumptions involved. You're just talking. That's an advantage that autists take with them into every single conversation they enter into. It's not a deficit. There are a lot of people who treat it like a deficit. Honesty, for some reason, isn't real popular these days. But that advantage is something that each and every one of us as autists can use to help train, those around us in understanding what it's like to really, really communicate about the nature of the world and what's going on between each and every one of us. That's an advantage. That's a fantastic advantage. Neurotypicals pay slightly better informed neurotypicals hundreds of thousands of dollars to come in to talk to them about it at corporate, team building retreats, those ones where they throw you down zip lines and have you fall backwards into people, let them catch you. Just don't do that. And it really is that simple. Now, I will freely admit that having the self-confidence to be able to stand up to someone and say, this is the world as I see it. This is the world as I interact with it. This is autism. This is part of who I am. ADHD, this is part of who I am. Love for Dave Matthews, this is part of who I am. All of these things are scary to share. They only become easier to share with practice, and the confidence that you need or want only comes from practicing that. My confidence came from 12 years of talk therapy. Still see one still get my brain flossed once a month. Good idea for everybody. And from standing up here and doing things like this. So I want to encourage anyone who has any interest in developing skills to be more confident and more capable in forming relationships of any kind. To reach out to the people around them and take an opportunity to practice. There was a fantastic presentation by the author and artist of Schlock Mercenary here in this room just before, and I kind of wish that he was doing this instead of me, but he was talking about how the 10,000 hours of practice will get you to where you want to be. I am absolutely ecstatic that we're starting to have more events like this. The guys here at Scenic View who have been doing, this is the second time they've done AutCon. The fact that they can get 100 autists into one building at the same time. Now, I will admit, these guys, they're cheating. This is their day job, so yeah. But the fact that they were able to get 100 autists into one building at the same time, and none of us are trying to flee for the doors yet, is absolutely fantastic. And these are the opportunities that up until the last 10 years have just not been available. At least not directly in relation to autism. I think some of us got pretty good at going to, comic conventions, although Comic-Con is a little bit much. And then we would find our little niches in the corner to congregate and talk. So what I guess what I would want to leave you with as part of this, and before we move into the questions, because somebody's always got questions, is that you have the ability naturally as an autist to apply your pattern recognition and your outsiderness to becoming better at communicating and more effective at creating change in the world around you than most neurotypicals will ever be, because they think they've already got the question answered, rather than questioning whether or not there is a question in the first place. The second is that taking the opportunity to learn and know yourself, to really sit down, and I'm not talking, in all honesty, I'm not talking about whether or not you prefer green or blue flannel. That's utterly useless in the scheme, in the greater scheme of things. But being able to sit down and look at the personality traits that you have, or the diagnoses that you have, all those little bits and pieces that make you up, and say, these pieces are important, and here I stand, and can do no other. That's, at the end of the day, that's all I got for you. So, now you have an opportunity to tear apart everything I've just said and ask me whatever questions you'd like. Or you can boo me off the stage and we can all go home. So, actually writing the user manual took about 3 weeks. Having the skills to write the user manual took 7 years. But actually writing it took about 3 weeks, and that's because I went through, in the case of about one page, one, maybe 2 pages a day, and just did, this is the one thing that I thought of today was important for me. It doesn't need to be done all at once, and if you can fit it on index cards and then just put it on binder rings, that works too. But just taking the opportunity to sit down and think about it can often be enough. I think you were next, and then you.
Do you think that that's something that everybody can do?
I fundamentally do believe, the question was, is that something everybody can do? I fundamentally believe that everybody has the ability to be able to be self-reflective. The key is if they want to be. I can't make you do something you're not ready for, and it's not my job to force you to do something that you're unwilling to do.
You have years of psychology.
That's true. That's right. Now, it was important for me to have several, almost a decade of psychotherapy to be able to reflect on that. But the simple truth is that we have access to the people around us who are perfect, who are usually, don't ask your mom. Just don't ask your mom. Don't get me wrong, I love my mother, but her view of me is just about as warped as my view of me is. So, but you've got people around you. The fact that you're here, I bet you could ask just about anybody in this room and they'd give you honest answers. And what you're looking for is the honest answers and the willingness to act on them. So.
What's the fastest way to go from employed status to necessary status?
Luck. Do your job well. I don't remember which book it was from or who it was from, actually, but there was a quote that I remember about making yourself indispensable. It's not about, here it is. The best way to become indispensable is not to do the unusual in a mediocre manner, but to do the mediocre with unusual quality. So if you can find, that's one of the reasons why autists are really useful in the testing industry, is because we're really good at doing something that nobody else has the time or patience to address. So finding what I like to call paperclip solutions. The guy who invented the paperclip, I don't remember, I think it was a Frenchman, but somebody invented the paperclip, right? Everybody uses paperclips, but nobody knows who did it. These are the ideas, these are the things that you can do where you're going to go out and you're going to solve one problem, you're going to become really, really good at it, and when you're really, really good at it, people find you and make you indispensable. So I'm sorry, we jumped you, so.
So when you have this, for lack of a better word, self-manual you hand out to people, you ever just have your one manual that you have just pencil in and go, here's how you run the meeting, please read it, not throw it in a black hole, or do you take copies of it and hand it out to your friends?
So generally what I do is I will actually, I use it as a conversation piece. I have maybe 2 copies of them. I mean, I've got digital copies all over my hard drive, but there's only 1 or 2 physical copies of it. I generally don't just sort of shove it out into the void, mostly because there's some information there that people could use against me if I'm not paying attention properly. But using it as a conversation starter, and you'd be surprised how many people think it's a fantastic conversation starter. Using it as a conversation starter and an opportunity to open a dialogue is how I recommend using it best. Because that way, you're not just, again, it's about providing an opportunity to interact rather than just dumping a problem on someone's lap. So.
If you're like in a gay relationship with a girl, would you tell them at first or like later on that you're autistic?
Generally, my recommendation for that is that the first time, try to get by on charm alone. If you can do it, if you can get through the first time on charm alone, then generally you know whether or not the relationship is going somewhere. The second time is when you can start broaching it. Because at that point, you've made a decision to come back and to continue to engage. And in all honesty, this depends on how important your autism, your diagnosis, or your state of being an autist is to you. If it's just something that kind of informs your quirks, yeah, sure, whatever. But if it's vital to who you are, then you need to put it on the table so that everybody's coming in as an informed party. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
When I talk to people, I always hesitate to mention things because I'm afraid of how they might react. Because I don't like confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest?
The glib answer to that question is, if they're going to react badly, you probably don't want to know them anyway. The full answer to that question is that it's a context thing. If your context, if the context of your relationship with someone is such that your autism is going to be relevant, and honestly, the number of cases in which that's true are actually very narrow, very vanishingly small almost. If you're trying to form a romantic relationship, it's definitely important. If you need accommodations at work, definitely important. In most other areas, it's flavor of the month. Pick whether or not it's important to you at that particular time. And if they react badly, that says more about them than it does about you. And it always will. Because if they can't react, if they can't handle something that's that much different from them without going into meltdown, we've got a lot of psychologists in Utah. They might want to see one. So the risk of being rejected when you share something is true of anybody. But it's a cost-benefit analysis in your mind at that moment as to whether or not the risk of being rejected is going to cause you long-term harm. So if sharing it with your landlord is going to get you kicked out, maybe not a good idea. Sorry. Wish I had a better answer than it depends, but as a general rule, it depends. Anybody else? I am working on a list of topics that I will be able to give out to people. The big four that I had in mind were first what my schedule was, and I'm sorry, the original question was what are the most important, is there a list that you can look at if you wanted to build a user manual, and can we use it as a cheat sheet, right? The four items that I would recommend off the top of my head are first, your daily schedule. That dictates, especially for autists, a lot of what goes on in their life. Start with that. 2, talk about the things that you really, really hate. When you're talking about stuff you love, people will generally go along with you, even if they don't share your passion. But for the things you really hate, these are the things you can't stand. Nails on the chalkboard stuff. Talk about that. Because if somebody else does that, then it becomes something that they have to adapt for. So this is in the user manual. The third for me was talking about food preferences. Food is a really, really big part of my life. I mean, come on, we eat 3 meals a day. Depending on how long you take to eat, this can be somewhere between 2 and 4 hours of your life every day. That's like 10% of your life. So it's kind of important. That's the third thing. And the fourth thing for me was actually religion, but that's just because it's critically important to me. Your belief system should probably be in the top 4. Mostly because, especially if you're trying to solve or form a long-term relationship with someone, meshing your belief systems is going to become very important at some point, regardless of whether or not it's romantic or just strictly friendship. Because if your friend is militantly agnostic and doesn't believe that anybody should believe in any higher power, and you very much believe that there's a higher power, you've got a conflict that's going to come up at some point. So you have to remember that the user manual is primarily for people who you're going to be spending a large amount of time with or looking to form a deeper relationship with. Don't give it to your cable guy. He doesn't need to know what you eat for breakfast. Okay. What? That is an interesting question. I gave it to my wife. I think I've given it to a couple of my siblings. I don't think my parents are ready to read it yet. Hmm? Oh. Yeah, sorry. My hearing isn't quite so. I'm actually a pilot, so I spend a lot of time in environments that have droning noise, so my hearing is kind of shot. So, sorry if I got your question wrong. Okay. Everybody else's opinion of you does not matter. The question was, if you could go back and tell your 16-year-old self something, what would it be? And the answer to that question is that everybody else's opinion doesn't matter. The only metrics that are truly important are the ones you set for yourself. There was a hand back there. You're probably going to hate me for this, but I do use Ubuntu for most of my servers. I mean, it's not bad, but the question was preferred Linux distribution. And it's Ubuntu for that, for anybody who actually cares. I think that I am about out of time and that we need to start transitioning people to the next set of things. So thank you very much for listening to me yak about my life. I hope you got something from it. Enjoy the rest of the convention.